Discover the incredible truth that transformed her hatred for the love who took her father away. Emma Parker sat hunched over a desk in her cramped apartment, rain drumming against the window in sorrowful syncopation. The stacks of her father's books, their spines cracked and weathered like the dreams promised within, loomed around her. Each title felt like a taunt, a reminder of the man who had chosen notoriety over family, of the love that had abandoned them to chase applause. As a research assistant in a university library, each mundane day fed her envy. The literary world thrived, yet here she was, left with the ashes of what could have been. A fierce resentment welled within her, an aching shadow that seemed to grow an inch taller each time someone gushed about her father's legacy. That brilliant novelist who had dazzled the literary elite but never looked back. Her mother's worn hands still trembled as she trailed her fingers over bills that never quite balanced. Emma felt the weight of that struggle tugging at her own heart, gnawing through her thoughts. Was she only part of a narrative meant to illustrate the consequences of her father's choices? Today was different, though. The promise of discovery lingered in the air as she began rummaging through old family artifacts. With each object she unearthed, a memory echoed. Laughter, joy, swaying in summer fields. And then, finally, the box. It was battered but unmistakably familiar, their last connection to him. Heart racing, Emma pulled it closer, her throat tightening with dread and curiosity. Inside lay a collection of her father's unpublished writings, cradled in yellowed paper, adorned with his elegant scrawl. One particular manuscript caught her eye, its title whispering promises of intimacy. As she opened the pages, her breath stalled. The words wrapped around her heart, stirring long-buried emotions. Love letters of sorts, penned to her, yet drowned in sorrow. Anger flushed through her, boiling like water on the verge of a violent boil. How could he leave this behind? This love poured into flowery sentences, leaving the world without regard for the chaos left in its wake. The woman in the literary agent's tailored suit had siphoned off his talent. She was the villain in a tale that had never ended, still seeking an audience while Emma battled against lingering ghosts. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The edges of her resolve began to fray. Would confronting the literary world that had seduced her father and isolated her from him bring some semblance of peace? In a single, sweeping notion, she envisioned it. An event, a reading to share her father's writings, to expose the artist for the man who had turned his back. Each hour spent drafting plans served as a double-edged sword, the thrill of action battling a storm of self-doubt. As entries for a local competition loomed, she penned a poem, not just about her father, but about her unspoken fears and ache for validation. But each recitation in quiet solitude echoed back questions. Who was she without him? Would the words bridging their separate worlds dissolve into resentment or bloom into healing? At that moment, in the grayscale shadows of her apartment, the weight of possibility rumbled like thunder, filling her with a tumultuous energy, demanding to break free. Emma stood suspended in that sliver of existence, where she could almost touch the truth, but it was a fragile thread. As competition day approached, the stakes elevated to heights she could scarcely navigate. Her pulse quickened, coiling with terror and determination. Was this about revenge, or was it an unveiling of herself? And just as uncertainty clawed at her insides, she prepared to step out, to face the light, her father's legacy, the haunting pull of love and resentment, ready to collide. As the competition day loomed ahead, Emma found herself lost in a whirlwind of emotion. Each hour bled into the next under the throbbing weight of anticipation, anxiety thrumming in her veins like a drum. Her small apartment now felt like a pressure cooker, each memory and each unfinished manuscript flickering at the edges of her consciousness, stirring both anger and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. She had dedicated sleepless nights to her poem, pouring out the words like a dam breaking, her hands trembling as they scribbled thoughts about heartbreak, abandonment, and ultimately the longing to reclaim what she had lost. Each stanza reflected a piece of her soul, confronting the father she had idolized and detested simultaneously. As she repeated the lines in her mind, practicing her delivery, she couldn't escape the gnawing question that plagued her. Would the audience even see her? Or was she merely the shadow trailing behind her father's legacy? With each concentrated breath before the mirror, she tried to tame the storm inside. The day prior, she had walked to the venue where the competition would unfold. The starkness of the building contrasted against the elegance forged from hopes and dreams. Dreams not just about her father, but her own potential. She had stared at the towering structure, her heart a prisoner of uncertainty, half hoping she might turn back and disappear into the crowd of anonymity. Emma's fingers danced across the page as she steadied her resolve. The gamble she was taking felt increasingly perilous. Yet, deep down, there was a flicker of awareness. This competition was not merely about her father or confronting the literary community. It was the first step in carving out her own identity. The words she wrote had the potential to shatter the molds others had placed upon her, and the roles expected of her as the forgotten daughter of a renowned novelist. As she rehearsed her performance in the mirror, her reflection seemed more vibrant, her passion igniting a warmth within her chest. With each line she felt more grounded, weaving her voice into the very tapestry of his legacy. In that moment, vulnerability transformed into strength, the conflict within her shifting into something wholly empowering. The day of the competition finally arrived, draped in a curtain of grey clouds that hung heavy with the promise of rain. Emma donned a simple dress, seeking comfort and reminding herself that she wasn't seeking accolades, only the truth in her words. The literary world that had once eclipsed her father loomed ahead, a place where his presence still echoed, but this time she held the mic, ready to break the silence. As she stood backstage, her heart raced in rhythm with the pounding applause from the audience filtering through the heavy door. Voices swelled. Excitement, nervousness, and her own deeply ingrained doubts battled for dominance. With each passing moment, Emma reminded herself of the love letters her father had penned, offering her fragments of connection. Suddenly, she felt a presence beside her. A confident young woman wearing chic glasses, her fingers tracing along the edge of her own notebook, as if contemplating the weight of unspoken words. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, genuine concern piercing through the air. Emma nodded, though uncertainty caused her voice to waver. "I'm just unsure if I can do this." "Trust yourself. You're not just sharing your father's legacy. You're sharing your own story, and it deserves to be heard." Emma inhaled sharply, the words washing over her like a balm. Perhaps this stranger understood what she had yet to fully grasp. The intertwining of legacies was not something to fear, but a truth waiting to be revealed. At that moment the host called her name, and the spotlight flared to life. Emma felt an indescribable pull in her chest, a force urging her to step forward and embrace the weight of her ancestry, transformed into something beautifully hers. As she moved toward the stage, a new realization flickered brightly. The time had come to face her father's world, not with bitterness, but with the strength to define her own narrative. And while she stood nervously in the glow of the spotlight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something within her had irrevocably changed. Would this moment mark the beginning of a new chapter, a reclamation of her identity? Emma's heart raced as she took a breath, ready to step into the light. Could she truly harness the narrative and redefine her father's legacy? The answer awaited her in the words that followed, poised to unfold her raw truth for the world to see, and possibly, for the first time, for herself. Emma stepped onto the stage, the wooden floor creaking beneath her feet, each note of applause morphing into a heartbeat of its own. The warmth of the lights washed over her, illuminating every hesitation and doubt barely masked beneath her facade of composure. All around her were faces, a sea of anticipation glimmering with curiosity. In those moments of overwhelming pressure, her thoughts darted back to the young woman backstage, the brevity of that encounter crystallizing in her mind. "Trust yourself," the words echoed, piercing through the haze of self-doubt. Taking a breath, she felt the cracks in her confidence begin to mend. As she scanned the audience, Emma recognized a sea of diverse expressions. Fellow aspiring poets, seasoned writers, and those simply seeking inspiration. Each one yearned for something authentic, something raw. Emma focused on the familiarity of their intent, a shared human experience she aimed to explore through the steep valleys of her own life. She reached for the paper in her hand, its edges worn from the countless nights of revision. The poem she had worked on manifested as both a weapon and a shield. It was a confrontation of her past, a catharsis binding her anger and heartache into verses potentially potent enough to resonate. "Too often I have been defined by the shadows of giants." Her voice pierced the thick silence, resonating with the weight of every syllable. Words poured forth as she began reciting, weaving through her emotions in vibrant hues. Pieces of her childhood rose like ghosts. The boy who lived next door, the laughter they shared, now tainted by her father's absence. "You taught me to love words, but did you ever love me?" A hush fell over the audience. Emma's voice quaked as she questioned, both a child searching for approval and an adult demanding recognition. The vulnerability was startling, yet within it lay burgeoning strength. As she continued, she confronted her father's legacy with each poem line. It was her story, wrapped around the truth she had hidden even from herself. "My art is not just a copy of your brilliance. It is a rebellion against your silence, as I fight to exist in my own body, unchained from the narratives forced upon me." She felt a shift in the room, an interweaving of connection and understanding sprouting in response to her honesty. The audience was no longer simply a crowd, but rather active participants, delicately threading their own stories into her performance. As she delivered the final lines, Emma's heart swelled and trembled at once. "In forging your legacy, I found mine. I embrace the shadows, but choose to stand in the light." A surge of applause erupted, drowning her uncertainty in affirmations. Each clap resonated with pride she desperately craved, but as she stepped back, vulnerability still lingered in her veins. Yet amidst the thrill of acceptance, a lingering shadow nagged at her, a question she feared to ponder. Was she ready to embrace the repercussions of this unveiling? Had she truly dealt with the complex emotions tied to her father, or was this merely the opening act in a much deeper exploration of resentment, loss, and rediscovery? Behind the applause, she saw the confident young woman from earlier nodding in encouragement. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The realization came crashing in like a wave. She had exposed parts of herself she had kept buried. What if doing so brought to light other truths she wasn't prepared to face? As she stepped off the stage, the echoes of her own words still tingling in the air around her, a decision hovered on the edge of her consciousness. The applause faded into whispers, leaving Emma to confront the deeper ramifications of her choice. Could she manage to navigate the raw emotions her performance had unearthed? And what new discoveries awaited in the shadows she had dared to illuminate? The backstage area felt both stifling and electric as Emma navigated through whispered discussions and congratulations. She could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her, mingling with a palpable anxiety. The weight of her performance, woven into the rich tapestry of emotions now exposed, made each step toward the exit feel monumental. The applause echoed faintly in her mind, a distant memory amidst the rising tide of doubt creeping back in. "Did you mean what you said?" The voice came from beside her, stirring her from her thoughts. It was the young woman, her expression earnest, eyes searching. Emma felt a mix of gratitude and apprehension. Here was someone who recognized the profundity of her declaration, yet the question felt like a spotlight better left dimmed. "Of course," Emma replied, but her voice faltered. Did she truly mean it? The confrontation with her father and the shadows he cast had exposed not just her insecurities, but profound truths that challenged her very foundation. "What comes next?" the woman pressed, her tone unwavering. Emma hesitated, considering the implications. I don't know." The admission sat heavily in the air. "You need to find your voice, now that you've given up so much," the woman encouraged, an unmasked urgency laced in her words. "The world needs your perspective, not just the shadows of your father." Her words ignited a flicker of determination within Emma, even as fear clutched her again. What would happen if she stripped away the layers that still protected her from past pains? Every poem would be a confrontation, every performance a step deeper into revealing herself. For a moment, she imagined discovering the depths of her own identity, a reinvention unfurling like a phoenix rising from ashes of old beliefs. But with that thought came the stings of reality. What if there were truths she couldn't bear to face? The complex feelings tied to her father's absence were palatial, and confronting them wasn't simple. It was an expedition into unknown territories of bitterness, grief, and unresolved anger. The rhetoric of her performance had made it feel actionable, but the reality of deep emotional exploration loomed ominously. Later that night, alone in her dimly lit apartment, Emma replayed the evening's events. She pulled out her notebook, pages marked with revisions and notes, and paused before opening to the poem she'd recited. Resistance surged within her. The urge to hide beneath old narratives was strong. But to truly grow, she recognized she had to challenge the instinct to bury her feelings once more. As she wrote, a new poem began to unfold, one that echoed not just her struggles, but the part of her she longed to reclaim. It poured out, raw and unrefined, grappling with the emotions she had only begun to understand. Each line became a thread, connecting her past and her aspirations, creating a fabric of resilience. It was not her father's silence that defined her. It was her own voice breaking through it. But with her pen poised over the page, a sudden thought pierced through her clarity. What if her words brought more chaos than healing? Emma closed her eyes, grappling with uncertainty. The more she explored, the riskier it became that she might unearth a truth capable of altering her future. Unraveling her emotions could invoke reactions she was not prepared to manage. What were the final costs of rewriting her narrative? As she fought against the trepidation swelling within, she realized she stood at a precipice, one that offered both liberation and fear. This process, while potentially cathartic, begged for resilience. The following day, she found herself scheduling a meeting with a local writing group. It was a calculated step, but one that could open a door she had never considered. Not only would she share her new work, but she would seek out interactions that could shape her understanding and refine her art. As she clicked to confirm, a sense of trepidation washed over her. Had she truly prepared herself to confront the potential fallout of her revelations? Emma wasn't merely seeking validation. She sought the support to truly confront her past. The dynamic between her history and her father's influence deeply intertwined with her identity rendered the stakes higher than ever. What would this new venture unearthed? Would sharing her fears muster courage or ignite unresolved conflicts once more? The choices she had made stood poised to steer her towards new revelations, and just as she felt a spark of hope, a chilling sense surfaced. The time had come to face the remnants of her father's shadow, and in doing so, confront the living legacy of her own voice. The morning of the writing group meeting arrived. Emma's stomach churned with a cocktail of anticipation and dread. Each tick of the clock echoed in her mind as she prepared herself. She dressed deliberately, opting for a simple black dress that felt like a shield, stylish yet understated. It was a reflection of her internal conflict, poised on the outside, an emotional tempest within. As she made her way to the small cafe that housed the group, the weight of her purpose pressed heavily against her chest. She envisioned standing before strangers, bearing not just her strongest words, but the raw heartache behind them. What if they didn't understand? What if her vulnerability laid her open to ridicule? When she finally entered the cafe, the chatter of fellow writers surrounded her, creating a comforting buzz. Their animated conversations about revisions and inspiration swirled around her like a warm embrace. Emma lingered at the entrance, half paralyzed by the sheer normalcy of it all. The sight of jumbled notebooks and scruffy pens scattered across tables triggered a wave of nostalgia for her college days, the time when writing had seemed more like an unbridled passion than a daunting pathway towards reconciling her past. After a moment, she drew in a deep breath, steeling herself to walk forward. With each step, an internal battle unfolded. Self-doubt grappled with a burgeoning sense of purpose. She recognized this moment as a reckoning, an opportunity to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under years of complacency. Introductions began, and she listened intently as each writer shared brief snippets of their creative journeys. Emma admired their confidence and authenticity, qualities she was still learning to embrace in herself. The moment came where she was forced to present herself, a jarring reminder of the raw demand she had placed on her own spirit. "Hi, I'm Emma," she began, her voice nearly drowned by the wave of anxiety crashing inside her. "I've recently started writing about my experiences with loss through poetry." The words felt simultaneously inadequate and transformative, like a seed struggling to break through its shell. As she read the poem she had drafted, the room fell silent. The words poured forth, heavy with the weight of heartfelt expression and vulnerability. Memories of her father's absence intertwined with her present reality, twisting into images that danced on the edges of understanding and pain. Emma sensed the audience draw closer. Every line captivated them, inviting a silent communion where her soul bared itself in front of them. When she finished, silence swept across the room before one member quietly clapped, soon joined by others. Their applause was warm, but what hit Emma harder were their reactions. Eyes glistened, heads nodded in understanding, and murmurs of empathy resonated like gentle waves. "Your voice is powerful," one of the women in the group said, her tone filled with sincerity. "It reminded me of my own struggles. It's brave to confront such depths." In that moment, Emma felt a connection, an affirmation that her voice carried weight, that her experiences were not on an island, but woven into a larger tapestry of shared human experience. As the group continued discussing their pieces, Emma found herself more engaged. Encouragement flowed like a lifeblood, and the fear of revealing her past began melting into an excitement for what lay ahead. She asked questions, sharing thoughts that sprang forth like a forgotten melody. This was not merely a space for critique. Here was a sanctuary for honesty and exploration. But with excitement came a creeping recognition of the emotional landscape she had just begun navigating. The ambiguous emotions tied to her father still loomed large, a shadow that threatened to obscure the clarity she had just discovered. Her newfound courage invited the possibility of deep-seated pain, and the thought of revealing more felt dangerously exhilarating. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt buoyed by the collective strength of the group. She reluctantly stepped out, refreshed yet unearthing deeper questions about her unresolved feelings. Leaving the cafe, she turned her thoughts back to the woman's question about her voice and what it would take to discover the full extent of her narrative. If she were to confront her pain, what truths would surface? The excitement of crafting her poetry now intertwined with the unsettling reality of her past. Emma knew the stakes had changed. She was no longer merely a performer, but a writer on the verge of real self-discovery. What would she uncover if she dared to peer deeper into her heart's chasm? The shadow's stillness whispered lies, yet the invitation to the light shimmered like a promise. Could her journey towards understanding also lead her to confront the love she held for something she barely understood? A father taken too soon, leaving in his wake a complex web of emotions tangled with her aspirations? And as she pondered this, an unsettling thought crossed her mind. The answer she sought could open doors she wasn't prepared to walk through. Would she be able to endure the revelations, even if they shattered her heart wide open? Emma's mind raced as she walked home, her heart still thumping from the day's revelations. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement, a visual echo of the lingering doubts that trailed her. Each shadow was a reminder of her father, a figure that had loomed large in her life, yet remained shrouded in complexities she found daunting to unravel. Sitting in her small apartment, Emma opened her notebook, its pages filled with half-formed thoughts and scattered verses. She had always sought solace in the written word, but the very act of writing had morphed into a mirror reflecting her unresolved feelings about her father. With every line she crafted, her anger at his absence clashed with her longing for a connection she never had. The juxtaposition of grief and resentment was almost unbearable. She began to write, her pen flying across the paper, scribbling out her emotions like a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos within her. "Why did you leave me?" she scrawled, drawing the ink across the page as if forcing the question into existence. It was a question she had buried, fearing the answers might carve deeper wounds. The poetry that spilled forth now felt like an excavation. With each stanza, Emma dug deeper, exposing layers of her grief that had begun to harden into anger. She wrote about the moments she'd never had, the advice he could have given, the stories he could have shared. But as the ink dried, so too did the static pain. Pulsing underneath was love, wrapped tightly in the hatred she clung to. "Can I face you through my words?" she pondered aloud, frustration mingling with an ember of hope. Could she transform her memories into something that didn't hurt? This thought ignited a spark of determination. Writing was not merely an act of remembrance, but an avenue of reclamation, a way to redefine her narrative. The next meeting of the writing group was on the horizon, and with it, an opportunity to confront this duality head-on. Emma resolved to share a new poem, one that would encapsulate not only her loss, but her burgeoning understanding of her father. It was frightening to think of unearthing these feelings, yet she felt a pull toward that delicate balance of love and pain. In preparation, she sought the counsel of books that explored similar themes: loss, reconciliation, the complexity of familial love. Each reference sparked thoughts, connecting her to other authors who had walked a path laden with sorrow and transformed it into something beautiful. Their courage resonated, echoing her own struggles. She found her voice amplifying, growing bolder. Still, lingering threads of doubt wove themselves into her psyche. What if her words did not resonate? What if they merely reflected her turmoil without the grace of understanding? Each thought weighed heavily, a tether that threatened to drag her back into the shadows she had started to emerge from. But in her heart, she recognized the rustle of change. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the day of the meeting grew nearer, Emma committed to refining her poem, intertwining lines of raw emotion with glimpses of forgiveness. The process became a ritual, a transformative journey where she recognized that confronting her father's absence and her feelings about it was not merely an act of grief, but a tribute to their unspoken love. Finally, standing before the mirror on the night before, she met her own gaze with a newfound resolve. The reflection revealed a woman fueled by the pursuit of her truth, unafraid to confront the messy intricacies of her past. This was about more than writing. It was about healing, gaining the strength to reclaim her narrative. But a whisper taunted her mind. What would she do if the act of unveiling her heart didn't yield the catharsis she craved? What if the exploration of her past led her to confront fears about what her father may have left behind in his absence? This was not just about finding her voice. It was about facing all that lay dormant within her, waiting for release. Would she summon the courage to step into the light and share her truth, all the while wondering if it would open up a chasm of more pain than she was ready to take on? The day of the writing group arrived too soon, and with it came a rain of self-doubt that had begun to trickle into Emma's mind from the moment she stepped out of her apartment. The world felt sharper, colors heightened under the muted gray of the sky. Each raindrop against the pavement mirrored her racing thoughts, cascading down in a rhythm of uncertainty. She hurried to the meeting, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. With every step, she recounted the lines of her poem, the words both a balm and a torment. She was acutely aware that sharing her creation felt akin to baring her soul, stood naked in front of a room filled with faces, each a reflection of her fear. What if they saw her truth and turned away? The thought twisted in her gut, a rogue weed choking her resolve. Yet, as she entered the cafe, the usual gathering spot, she took in the familiar faces, their smiles tinged with warmth. They had traveled their own roads of struggle and redemption, much like her. Each one had their own story of loss, of betrayal, and of eventual healing. The chair she chose at the back offered a slight cushion of safety, but anxiety still buzzed in her ears. As Emma listened to the others share, their voices carved spaces for connection. Each story unveiled a tapestry of resilience, stitching individual memories together like a comforting quilt. A surge of inspiration washed over her. Implicit in their narratives was the idea that vulnerability paved the way to authenticity. Perhaps her words could join that collective, and in doing so, illuminate her own path toward resolution. When her turn came, the world contracted, her heart hammering in the silence that followed. Reaching for her notebook, her fingers trembled. The pages felt like a fragile bridge she was teetering on, spanning an abyss she feared to confront. Could she walk that bridge and emerge whole on the other side? Or would she stumble and fall into darkness? No turning back now, she whispered under her breath, summoning every ounce of courage she could muster. As she began to read, her voice was soft yet steady. "Why did you leave me?" The words punctuated the air with a rawness that hung palpably. She continued, weaving her way through the memories and emotions tangled within her grief, her longing, and the fleshy truths she had started to grapple with. Reading her poem became an act of catharsis, each line unraveling the tight coil of resentment and loss she had nurtured for so long. When she finished, a hush filled the space. Emma held her breath, searching the faces for judgment, but instead finding empathy. Soft, understanding gazes mirrored her own struggle. One member of the group, an older woman with lines of experience etched on her face, spoke first. "Your words spoke to something deep within me," she said. "I've wrestled with similar feelings about my daughter. The need for connection can often become tainted by anger and fear." More comments followed, each resonating with the sentiments Emma had scraped from the depths of her heart. The validation filled her with newfound strength and a sense of belonging. Their faces lit with shared understanding. In their vulnerability, she found safety. Yet the lingering question remained. What would she do with this connection? Was it enough to simply share her pain, or did it compel her to seek further? As the meeting wrapped up, a new thought began to burgeon. She wondered if confronting her father's absence meant reconciling the things he left unresolved, the scattered memories and whispered truths she'd never had. With a flicker of realization, Emma pondered the idea of rewriting not just her past, but also the future that lay ahead. Standing on the precipice of an impending decision, she felt the weight of her journey shift. It was time to reach out beyond the words, an exploration not just of her pain, but of where it could lead. Could she navigate the turbulent waters of forgiveness? As she left the cafe, the rain ceased, and the first rays of sunlight broke through clouds, illuminating the wet pavement and her path forward. With each step, the question pulsated within her. Would she dare to connect the dots and seek the hidden truths about her father's absence before rewriting their shared legacy? Emma walked along the sunlit street, her footsteps steady, but her mind racing with the implications of her newly formed resolution. The realization that she needed to confront her father's absence weighed heavy, yet it also ignited an unexpected determination within her. The warmth of the sun seeped into her skin, a stark contrast to the coldness that had gripped her heart for so long. As she turned the corner towards her apartment, her thoughts twisted around the confrontation that lay ahead. She recalled stories from the writing group, and how raw and revealing their words had been. It struck her as ironic that the act of sharing had brought with it not only vulnerability, but also a communal strength. Could she transform the depths of her pain into something more substantial? By the time she reached her door, she felt a chaotic swirl of fear and anticipation. The uncertainty of gathering her thoughts and confronting the complicated web of her father's past made her stomach churn. What if facing the truth opened doors best left closed? With a deep breath, she silenced the nagging doubts. She was ready to step beyond her boundaries, a pivotal shift from merely existing to actively seeking. Sitting on her bed, she grabbed her notebook, the pages still filled with ink-stained vulnerabilities from the group. She flipped to a blank page, her pen hovering over it as her mind raced through the questions that needed answers. What had her father truly experienced? What had shaped him into the man she lost? And most importantly, what truths had been kept from her? As she wrote, a series of fragmented revelations spilled onto the page, blending her emotions with an urgent need for clarity. Each word was a tether to pieces of her father she would have to piece together, a search that felt as daunting as it was necessary. Her hand hesitated. There would inevitably be pain in those memories, but she realized the pain didn't have to define her. The pursuit of understanding could offer release, and perhaps even forgiveness. Suddenly, a thought broke through the haze. What if her mother held fragments of the truth? The idea struck a nerve, igniting a fire of both trepidation and hope. It was time to reach out, to confront the silence that had surrounded her father's departure for years. While the prospect filled her with anxiety, she also recognized it as a step toward healing, not just for her, but for her mother too. The decision solidified into action as she picked up her phone, her fingers shaking. After lingering over the contact list, she landed on her mother's name, her heart racing at the implications of the call. Memories of past conversations flooded her mind, marginally tainted by avoidance and discomfort. Would revisiting those painful chapters finally illuminate the dark corners of their shared history? As the dial tone echoed in her ear, her resolve wavered, a trembling vulnerability clawing at her. What if her mother wasn't ready to unearth those buried truths? What if confrontation birthed more wounds than it healed? But Emma leaned into the uncertainty. Revealing hidden truths meant digging deep and unearthing pain, but also unlocking potential for understanding. The call connected, and the sweet sound of her mother's tentative voice urged Emma onward. "Mom, can we talk?" The weight of those simple words felt monumental. It was an invitation to engage with their past, to share not just sorrow, but perhaps even hope for reconciliation. As Emma's words flowed, an electric realism washed over her. Confrontation had begun, and with it came the unsettling promise of transformation. Would the truth she unearthed about her father and their fractured lives usher in a newfound freedom? Or would they entangle her deeper in a web of regret? With every heartbeat, the intensity built, revealing the potential for discovery, and the frightening realization was clear. She was no longer just rewriting her legacy, she was redefining it. However, one thought loomed heavy above all others. Was she prepared for whatever truth lay waiting in the shadows? Emma's heart raced as she sat on the edge of her bed, phone still pressed to her ear, her mother's hesitant silence echoing in the atmosphere, thick with unspoken words. The enormity of the conversation hung between them, a fragile thread ready to snap. She could feel her mother's anxiety mirrored in her own. Would this discussion deepen their rift, or finally bridge the chasm of silence that had suffocated both of them? "Emma," her mother finally whispered, breaking the stillness. "What is it you want to talk about?" The question pierced through Emma's resolve, awakening old fears. She could feel the weight of her years of bottled frustrations, stemming from her father's absence, pressing down upon her. "I want to understand. About Dad. About why he left." Each word felt like both a release and a risk. Her mother's breath stuttered at the mention of Emma's father, the palpable tension signaling a storm ready to unleash. I thought we had moved past that." "Moved past what?" Emma countered, annoyance mingling with desperation. "You've never really talked about him. You've always kept me in the dark." Silence filled the space again, thickening the air with discomfort. Emma could almost hear her mother see the truth in her words, but resist it. Her shields fortified by years of keeping pain at bay. Emma took a moment, steeling herself against the rising tide of emotions, a mixture of regret, betrayal, and the glimmer of what could be if they could just navigate this storm together. "Mom, it's not just about him. It's about us. I don't want to keep living in a shadow where nothing makes sense," she urged, her voice softer yet firm. Eventually, Emma heard a sigh, heavy and resigned. "He was a complicated man, Emma. There are things I've kept hidden to protect you." That simple statement unraveled something deep within Emma. Did her mother sip from a well of grief so deep that sharing it felt like drowning? Emma realized it wasn't merely about her father's absence. It was about her mother's silence acting as a barrier not just to her past, but their future. "Protect me from what?" Emma's tone was careful, probing but gentle as she sought for hidden roots under the weight of the facade her mother had maintained. "It's my life too. I deserve the truth." A long pause followed before her mother's voice trembled. "He loved you so much, but there were demons he couldn't fight. He left because he thought that's what was best." Those words hung in the space between them, reverberating painfully. Emma's mind raced. The implication twisted her gut. It wasn't an absence just born out of selfish choice, but from a deeply flawed love. Was that supposed to bring her comfort or pain? "But you have to ask yourself why he thought leaving was the answer, Mom. Don't you see? We both lost someone we loved," Emma pressed, the emotional turmoil stirring within her, spurring her on. "I thought I was protecting you," her mother exclaimed. "Sometimes the truth is too heavy to bear. But it's heavier not knowing." Emma took a deep breath, trying to quell the wave of empathy competing with resentment. "I want to know the truth, even if it hurts." The vulnerability in her mother's silence spoke volumes. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this conversation, with all its potential pain, was the beginning of reclaiming something lost. As her mother finally began to share fragmented stories, the struggles, the battles, and the reasons behind her father's absence, Emma felt a crucial shift inside her. Each new revelation became another piece of her fractured legacy she could grasp, bringing clarity and a sense of agency. Yet, just as understanding began to take root, Emma felt a different sense of unease creeping in. With truth came new questions. Would she be able to forgive? Could she accept the failings of a father she hardly knew? Amid the whirlwind of revelations, one thought remained gnawing in her mind. Was she truly prepared to face the legacy left behind, whatever shape that might take? The conversation drew her in deeper, and with it arose the challenge of confronting everything she had held within for so long. Could she not only forgive her father, but also her mother for the silence they had imposed upon her? As the answers began to spill forth, Emma found herself standing at the precipice of self-discovery, a truth now illuminating her path. But as understanding dawned, she couldn't shake the lingering question. What would this newfound knowledge require of her, and was she ready to shoulder that weight? Emma Parker emerged from the labyrinthine depths of her familial history, illuminated by a newfound understanding. The conversations with her mother had given rise to long-buried emotions, forging a connection rooted in shared pain and the need for healing. What initially felt like an insurmountable dark cloud began to shift, revealing glimpses of clarity. Emma now grasped that hurdles could be transformed into stepping stones toward emotional reclamation. In her small apartment, a space once filled with the shadows of resentment, luminous fragments of their conversation danced through her mind. She felt more than a survivor. She was a co-architect of her narrative. The revelation of her father's demons, his struggles, fears, and even the misguided choices that led to his estrangement, had shifted her perspective. Her resentment evolved into a complex compassion, an understanding that they were all imperfect players in a challenging story that needed to be rewritten. Through pen and paper, Emma began to transmute her turmoil into art. Each poem that flowed from her being was a reclamation not just of her father's legacy, but of her own identity. She poured words onto the page like a sculptor chiseling at a block of marble, revealing the masterpiece hidden within. Gone were the days of simply feeling like a shadow. The emotional landscape she traversed presented opportunities for cathartic healing, each stanza a step toward authenticity. It was at the next writing group meeting that Emma truly felt this transformation solidify. She stood before her peers, her palms resting on the lectern, the weight of her opportunity feeling both exhilarating and validating. The poem she shared was a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of anguish, understanding, and ultimately, love. Each absence teaches me, she stated, her voice strong as she recited lines that explored the duality of loss and the strength found in embracing vulnerability. The response from her audience was immediate and visceral. Applause erupted, underpinned by the soft sighs of recognition and empathy. Writers who had grappled with their own pasts found themselves mirrored in her words. She could see it in their faces. Her authenticity struck a chord, ignited reflections of their battles, and invited them to consider their own healing journeys. With every clap, Emma felt anchors lifting. The burdens she had carried began to dissolve in the collective warmth of acceptance. And, as she stepped off the stage that night, it was clear that she had achieved more than merely delivering a heartfelt performance. She had genuinely connected. Emma found herself standing on the precipice of a hopeful horizon. Conquering her father's past allowed her to reconcile the complexities of her emotions. In shedding that weight, she emerged not washed away but emboldened, confident in declaring, "I am not just his daughter. I am my own person." The turning point crystallized when she received an email. The local literary magazine sought to feature her poem in their next issue, spotlighting new voices in poetry. The validation was electric, a testament to her hard-fought journey of transformation. She realized that beyond the adrenaline rush of performance was a tangible achievement that could inspire others grappling with loss. And while the shadows of her past would always linger, they no longer determined her identity. Emma embraced her newfound narrative. She could finally acknowledge that loving her father didn't mean absolving him of his choices. Instead, It was an affirmation of her resilience and capability to forge her own path. As she gathered her notes, Emma felt a deep sense of gratification. She had not only unearthed her father's legacy, but had conjured her own, layered in intensity, with a shimmer of hope illuminating the landscape of her future. Her hands trembled not in fear, but in excitement for what lay ahead. The next step in her journey was clear: to mentor young writers at the local high school and guide them in exploring their own pasts. Emma had transformed from the girl tethered by disdain into a woman armed with the power of her voice, prepared to lead others down the healing path she had walked. This wasn't just her victory, it was collective, a testament of perseverance echoing from deep within her heart. The time had arrived for her to thrive, not just survive. Her journey held the power to uplift and inspire. It was her time to weave new legacies, fueled not by shadows, but by the brilliance of her own light. Now, more than ever, she understood. She had the pen in her hand, and the pages were hers to fill. You need to subscribe now to witness more incredibly transformative stories like Emma's. Leave a like now to feed this algorithm and share the power of personal growth. Comment your reactions and theories about Emma's journey. We're eager to hear your thoughts. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who are ready to be inspired by life-changing transformations.